The damn badge felt like a lead weight on my chest. The gleam of the Laredo PD shield was long gone, dulled by countless nights chasing shadows and shaking down two-bit hoods. It was a mirror of my soul, tarnished and worn down by a career that had promised so much and delivered so little. My desk was a graveyard of unsolved cases, a monument to my failures. Yellowed photographs of victims stared back at me with accusing eyes, their stories etched into my memory like scars. Newspaper clippings littered the surface, headlines blaring about the rising crime rate, grim symphony of violence and despair. I poured myself a shot of tequila from the bottle stashed in my bottom drawer, the amber liquid a temporary balm for the ache in my bones. The burn in my throat was a welcome distraction from the emptiness in my gut. Retirement was a week away, a looming deadline that filled me with a mix of dread and relief. I had dreamed of this day for years, fantasizing about fishing trips and lazy afternoons on the porch. But now, faced with the reality of leaving behind the only life I had ever known, I felt a gnawing sense of unease. A knock on the door startled me.
"Martinez,
A gruff voice barked.
we need you downstairs."
I downed the rest of the tequila and followed the voice down the dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that danced on the walls like mocking specters. I reached the interrogation room, my heart pounding with a familiar mix of adrenaline and dread. Inside, two young women huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. They were fresh off the bus, their clothes still caked with the dust of the desert. Their faces were etched with the weariness of a long journey. But it was the terror in their eyes that caught my attention.
"They speak Spanish,"
one of the officers said, nodding towards me.
"Maybe you can get something out of them."
I sat down across from the women, my badge glinting in the harsh light. "My name is Detective Martinez," I said in Spanish, my voice soft. "I'm here to help." The women exchanged nervous glances, their lips pressed into thin lines. I offered them water, a small gesture of kindness that often broke down barriers. One of the women, a young mother with a baby swaddled to her chest, finally spoke.
"It's La Llorona.
She whispered, her voice trembling.
She's in Juarez."
My heart skipped a beat. La Llorona, the weeping woman, a ghost story meant to scare children, not a reason for grown women to tremble with fear. But the look in their eyes told me that this was more than just a myth. "What about La Llorona?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman's eyes filled with tears.
"They say she takes children.
She sobbed.
Many have disappeared. The police, they do nothing."
I spent the next hour listening to their stories, each more horrifying than the last. They spoke of a city gripped by fear, of a dark shadow that had fallen over Juarez. La Llorona was the name on everyone's lips, a specter of death that haunted their dreams. I left the interrogation room, my mind reeling. The stories I had heard were too disturbing to ignore, too consistent to be mere coincidence. I knew I was supposed to be winding down, preparing for retirement. But a fire had been lit within me, a spark of curiosity and a thirst for justice that had long been dormant. I returned to my desk, the pile of unsolved cases taunting me. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Hey, it's Mike Martinez," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I need a favor." The air in the detention cell was thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and desperation. Shadows danced on the faces of the huddled migrants, their eyes wide with the trauma of their journey. The only sound was the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet, a metronome marking the slow passage of time. I watched from the dimly lit observation room, my notebook open, my pen poised. The migrants spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely audible through the thick glass, but I could make out the words, fragments of conversation that painted a picture of a city under siege.
"They say it takes our kids away."
A young woman whispered, her voice trembling.
"They say it's La Llorona."
A shiver ran down my spine. La Llorona again. The weeping woman, a specter of grief and vengeance, said to roam the rivers and streams, searching for the souls of her drowned children. A ghost story meant to scare children, not a reason for grown men to tremble with fear.
"The Warlock.
Another voice chimed in, a gruff, masculine tone.
They say he can protect us, but at what cost?"
El Brujo, the Warlock, a figure shrouded in mystery, rumored to possess powers beyond those of mortal men. Some said he could grant wishes, others claimed he was in league with the devil. But one thing was clear: he was a force to be reckoned with. I scribbled furiously in my notebook, my mind racing. La Llorona, El Brujo, missing children. The pieces of a puzzle were starting to coalesce, forming a picture that was far darker than anything I had imagined. The young woman spoke again, her voice filled with a chilling certainty.
"This isn't a fairy tale,"
she said.
"La Llorona is real. I have seen her with my own eyes."
I leaned closer to the glass, my breath fogging up the surface. The woman's words echoed in my ears, a haunting melody of fear and despair. I had spent my career chasing shadows, chasing ghosts of my own making. But this was different. This felt real, tangible. Flicker of excitement ignited within me, a spark that had long been dormant. This was a story worth chasing, a mystery that could redefine my legacy. I knew I was on the verge of something big, something that could change the course of my life. I closed my notebook, a sense of purpose filling me. I left the observation room, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. I walked out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling like a million fireflies. I took a deep breath, the smell of exhaust and cheap perfume filling my lungs. Juarez, a city of contradictions, a place where hope and despair danced a macabre tango. I was a stranger in this land, a weary detective on the cusp of retirement, but I was also a man on a mission, a seeker of truth, and I was ready to face whatever darkness lurked in the shadows. Back in my cramped apartment, I tossed a few essentials into a worn duffel bag, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and a bottle of tequila for good measure. On top, I placed my journalist disguise, a faded press pass from a small-town newspaper I had once worked for as a cub reporter, and a battered notebook filled with half-finished stories and scribbled observations. It wasn't much, but it was enough to lend me an air of legitimacy, a mask to hide behind as I ventured into the belly of the beast. The Laredo Bridge was a familiar sight, a steel and concrete artery connecting two worlds. I had crossed it countless times, chasing leads, transporting suspects, and witnessing the endless stream of humanity seeking refuge or opportunity on the other side. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a cop. I was a seeker of truth, a lone wolf on a mission to uncover the darkness lurking beneath the surface of a city haunted by fear. As I crossed the bridge, the skyline of Juarez emerged from the haze, a jagged silhouette against the setting sun. The city's lights twinkled with a deceptive allure, masking the grim reality that lay hidden beneath. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and burning trash, a pungent reminder of the city's industrial heart. I checked into a seedy hotel on the outskirts of town, its neon sign flickering intermittently, casting a sickly glow on the cracked pavement below. The room was small and sparsely furnished, the air conditioner rattling like a dying animal. But it was a sanctuary, a place where I could shed my disguise and plot my next move. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of my mission heavy on my shoulders. I had no backup, no resources, just my instincts and a burning desire to expose the truth. I opened my notebook and began to write, the words flowing onto the page like a confession. Juarez, a city of shadows, a place where fear reigns supreme. La Llorona, a specter of grief and vengeance, stalks the streets. El Brujo, a master manipulator, weaves a web of deceit and despair. Missing children, their fate unknown. I am here to unravel this mystery, to shine a light on the darkness. I am here to find the truth. I closed the notebook, a newfound resolve filling me. I was no longer a weary detective on the verge of retirement. I was a hunter, a predator stalking its prey, and I would not rest until I had brought the monsters of Juarez to justice. The following morning, I stepped out of the hotel into the heart of Juarez's underbelly. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the air was thick with a palpable tension that chilled me to the bone. Graffiti-covered walls bore witness to the city's struggles, the vibrant colors masking a deeper despair. The smell of burning trash, a constant presence in the air, clung to my clothes like a shroud. I wandered through the labyrinthine streets, past crumbling buildings and makeshift shelters. The city seemed to hold its breath, every corner whispering secrets of violence and desperation. I came across a candlelight vigil, a flickering tribute to the missing migrants. Mothers wept, their faces etched with grief, clutching photographs of their children as if they could somehow will them back to life. The Rio Grande, once a symbol of hope and opportunity, now served as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface. Bodies had been found washed up on its banks, their faces contorted in terror, their lives extinguished before they could reach the promised land. The police tape fluttering in the wind at each crime scene was a silent indictment of a system that had failed to protect the most vulnerable. I made my way to the police station, a fortress of concrete and steel that radiated an air of authority. The officers eyed me with suspicion, their hands hovering near their holsters. I flashed my press pass, a flimsy shield against their distrust. "I'm here to report on the disappearances," I said, my voice steady. "I want to understand what's happening in this city." A grizzled veteran with a face like a weathered leather boot stepped forward.
"You're wasting your time, gringo,"
he said, his voice gruff.
"This is Juarez. People disappear every day. It's just the way things are."
I met his gaze, my own eyes hardening. "Not like this," I said. "Not children, not this many." The officer shrugged, his indifference a chilling reminder of the city's apathy.
"Maybe La Llorona took them,"
he said with a sneer.
"You should ask her."
I left the police station, my resolve strengthened. Their indifference only fueled my determination to uncover the truth. I wandered the streets, my senses on high alert. I saw children playing in the shadows, their laughter tinged with an underlying fear. I saw women clutching their babies protectively, their eyes darting nervously as they hurried past. I stopped at a small market, the air thick with the smell of spices and roasting meat. I struck up a conversation with a vendor, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She listened patiently as I explained my mission, her expression growing somber as I described the disappearances.
La Llorona is not to blame.
She said, her voice barely a whisper.
It is something else, something darker. The people are afraid to speak of it, but I have heard whispers.
I leaned in, my heart pounding. Whispers of what? I asked. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting around as if afraid of being overheard.
El Brujo,
she finally said.
They say he is the one behind the disappearances. He promises them a better life, but he takes their souls in return.
A chill ran down my spine. El Brujo. The name had come up before, but I had dismissed it as mere superstition. Now I knew it was something more, a thread I needed to follow if I wanted to unravel the mystery of Juarez's missing children. The woman's voice was hushed, barely a whisper, as she spoke to the tarot card reader in the smoke-filled back room of a cantina. Her eyes were wide with desperation, her hands clutching a worn photograph of a young boy. The reader, a wizened old woman with a face like a crumpled map, laid out the cards, her fingers tracing the intricate symbols with a practiced touch.
"The devil,"
she murmured, her voice raspy.
"He is near. He offers you a path to your desires, but beware the price he demands."
The woman's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat.
El Brujo,
she whispered, her voice barely audible.
He can bring my son back, can't he?
The reader nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear.
"Perhaps,"
she said.
"But be warned, child. His power comes at a steep price. Do not trust his promises."
I watched from the shadows, my heart heavy with the woman's sorrow. The scene was a stark reminder of the desperation that fueled El Brujo's power. He preyed on the vulnerable, offering them false hope in exchange for their souls. I left the cantina, the smoke clinging to my clothes like a shroud. I wandered through the streets, my mind racing. I had to find El Brujo, to confront him and expose his evil. But first, I needed to understand the source of his power, the dark magic that held the city in its grip. My search led me to a hidden alleyway, its walls adorned with a mural depicting El Brujo. He was a skeletal figure with glowing eyes, his body adorned with symbols of power and dominion. The mural was a chilling reminder of the man's influence, a testament to the fear he inspired in the hearts of the people. I tracked down a local shaman, a woman rumored to possess knowledge of the ancient traditions. She lived in a small adobe hut on the outskirts of town, surrounded by herbs and talismans. Her eyes, wise and knowing, seemed to see into my soul.
"You seek El Brujo,"
she said, her voice soft but firm.
He is a dangerous man, a master of deception. His magic is fueled by the suffering of others.
I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. I need to stop him, I said, but I don't know how. The shaman smiled sadly.
His power comes from the fear of the people,
she said.
To defeat him, you must first break their faith in him. You must show them that he is not a god, but a mortal man with a twisted heart.
I left the shaman's hut, her words echoing in my ears. I knew what I had to do. I had to expose El Brujo for the fraud he was, to show the people of Juarez that they had nothing to fear. I returned to my hotel room, my mind racing with a newfound determination. I opened my notebook and began to write, the words flowing onto the page like a river of righteous anger. El Brujo, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a charlatan preying on the weak and desperate. He promises miracles, but delivers only despair. I will expose him for the monster he is. I will break the spell he has cast over this city. I will bring justice to the people of Juarez. The morning sun painted a deceptive picture of Esperanza Nueva. The gleaming facade of the modern building sparkled with a promise of hope. Its pristine white walls a stark contrast to the grime and grit of the surrounding streets. Smiling volunteers bustled about, handing out food and blankets to a line of weary migrants, their faces a carefully crafted mask of compassion. But beneath the veneer of charity, a darker truth festered. I had learned from Ana that Esperanza Nueva wasn't just a shelter, it was a well-oiled machine of exploitation. The organization's director, a charismatic woman named Elena Flores, was rumored to have ties to both the Juarez cartel and corrupt officials within the local government. One afternoon, I snuck in through the receiving door and I followed some church volunteers. While sorting through donations in the basement, I stumbled upon a hidden surveillance camera. It was cleverly disguised, its lens peeking out from a ventilation grate. Curiosity piqued, I retrieved the footage, my heart pounding with anticipation. The video revealed a heated argument between Elena Flores and a man I recognized from my days on the force, a high-ranking cartel member known as El Serpiente. Their words were a venomous exchange of threats and accusations, revealing a deep-rooted partnership built on greed and exploitation. The footage was the smoking gun I needed, proof of the unholy alliance between Esperanza Nueva and the criminal underworld. I made a copy of the video and returned the camera to its hiding place, my mind racing with the implications of what I had discovered. Later that night, I staked out Esperanza Nueva, my eyes scanning the darkened streets for any sign of suspicious activity. A few hours passed, the silence broken only by the occasional bark of a stray dog. Just as I was about to give up, a black SUV pulled up to the back entrance of the building. Two men in police uniforms emerged from the vehicle, their faces obscured by shadows. I followed them discreetly, my heart pounding in my chest. They entered the building, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors. I waited outside, my senses on high alert. After what felt like an eternity, the men emerged, carrying a large duffel bag. They loaded the bag into the SUV and sped off into the night. I followed them at a distance, my mind racing with possibilities. What was in the bag? Drugs? Money? Or something more sinister? I knew I had to find out. I followed the SUV to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building was dark and silent, save for the faint hum of machinery. I parked my car a safe distance away and crept closer, my footsteps muffled by the gravel. I peered through a crack in the door, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Inside, I saw the two police officers handing the duffel bag to a group of men in cartel attire. The men opened the bag, revealing stacks of cash and several plastic-wrapped packages. My heart sank as I realized the truth. Esperanza Nueva was not just exploiting migrants. It was actively participating in the drug trade. I had stumbled upon a conspiracy far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Esperanza Nueva was a cog in a vast criminal network, a conduit for illicit activities that were poisoning the city. And El Brujo was at the center of it all, a puppet master pulling the strings of corruption and despair. Back in the confines of my hotel room, the dim light bulb casting long shadows, I pored over the evidence I'd pilfered from Esperanza Nueva. A secret ledger, meticulously maintained, detailed a network of payoffs to cops, judges, even a few city council members. The sums weren't huge, but they were enough to buy silence, to turn a blind eye to the organization's shady dealings. A burner phone buzzed in the pocket of a stolen lab coat. The message was brief, cryptic. "The river claims another soul tonight." A chill ran down my spine. Another victim, another life snuffed out to feed El Brujo's insatiable hunger for power. I knew I was getting too close. The cartel, the cops, El Brujo himself, they were all starting to feel the heat. I had poked the beast, and it was starting to stir. The next morning, I met Anna at a nondescript cafe near the border. We sat in a secluded booth, the smell of cheap coffee mingling with the nervous energy that crackled between us. I showed her the ledger and the text message, my voice barely a whisper. "This is bigger than we thought," I said, my eyes scanning the room for eavesdroppers. "They're involved in everything. Drugs, human trafficking, you name it." Anna's face paled, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her coffee.
"We need to get this out there,"
she said, her voice barely audible.
"We need to expose them."
I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'll keep digging," I said. "You start writing." We left the cafe, our paths diverging as we each went our separate ways. I returned to Esperanza Nueva, my senses heightened, my every move calculated. I had to be careful to avoid raising any suspicions. But I also knew I had to keep pushing to uncover the full extent of their crimes. Later that night, as I was leaving the compound, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The engine was running, its headlights casting an eerie glow on the deserted street. I quickened my pace, my instincts screaming at me to run. Suddenly, the SUV roared to life, its tires screeching as it sped towards me. I dove for cover just as a hail of bullets ripped through the air, shattering the windows of a nearby shop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, the sound of gunfire echoing behind me. I ducked into an alleyway, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the SUV screeching to a halt, its doors slamming shut. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. Footsteps echoed in the darkness, heavy and deliberate. I knew I was cornered, trapped like a rat in a maze. I reached for my gun, my fingers tightening around the worn grip. I had no intention of going down without a fight. But as the footsteps drew closer, I realized something was wrong. They were too light, too hesitant. A figure emerged from the darkness, a young woman with wide, frightened eyes.
Senor Martinez?
She whispered, her voice trembling.
I saw what happened. Come with me, I can help you.
The young woman, Maria, led me through a labyrinth of back alleys and darkened courtyards. We moved quickly, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth. She didn't speak, her eyes darting nervously from side to side as if afraid of being followed. We arrived at a small, run-down apartment building, its windows boarded up, its walls adorned with faded graffiti. Maria led me up a rickety staircase, the wood creaking under our weight. She unlocked a door and ushered me inside. The apartment was sparsely furnished, the air thick with the smell of old cooking and incense. A single candle flickered on a makeshift altar, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Maria gestured for me to sit on a worn sofa, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination.
You must be careful,
she whispered, her voice barely audible.
El Brujo is a dangerous man. He will stop at nothing to protect his secrets.
I nodded, my mind racing. I had to find a way back into Esperanza Nueva to gather more evidence and expose El Brujo's operation. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed Maria's help. "I need to get back inside," I said, my voice firm. "Can you help me?" Maria hesitated, her eyes searching mine. I could see the conflict within her, the fear warring with her desire to do what was right. Finally, she nodded.
I can get you a volunteer application,
she said.
But you must be careful. They are watching everyone.
The next morning, Maria returned with the application. My hands shook slightly as I filled out the form, fabricating a backstory that would hopefully withstand scrutiny. I listed my name as Miguel Sanchez, a down-on-his-luck journalist from Mexico City, looking for a fresh start. I returned to Esperanza Nueva later that day, my heart pounding in my chest. I handed the application to a smiling volunteer who ushered me into a small office. I was interviewed by a stern-faced woman with piercing eyes, her every question a veiled test of my loyalty. I answered carefully, my words measured and rehearsed. To my relief, I was accepted. I was assigned to the sorting room, a monotonous task that involved folding clothes and organizing donations. It was mind-numbingly boring, but it gave me the opportunity to observe the inner workings of Esperanza Nueva. I noticed how the volunteers, once so friendly and welcoming, became cold and calculating behind closed doors. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations filled with cryptic references and veiled threats. I saw the fear in the eyes of the migrants, their spirits broken by the constant surveillance and intimidation. One evening, as I was sorting through a pile of donated clothes, I overheard a whispered conversation between two volunteers. They were discussing a secret ritual to be held that night, a ceremony to appease La Llorona and ensure the continued success of Esperanza Nueva. My heart quickened. This was my chance to see the true face of El Brujo. I waited until nightfall, then slipped out of the sorting room and followed the sound of chanting to a hidden chamber deep within the building. The door was unlocked, as if inviting me to enter. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open and stepped inside. Under the cloak of night, I followed a group of volunteers as they left the main building of Esperanza Nueva. They moved with a practiced silence, their faces obscured by the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through my veins. I kept my distance, careful not to be discovered, my footsteps barely a whisper on the dirt path. We reached the riverbank, the moon casting an eerie glow on the rippling water. The volunteers gathered in a clearing, their figures silhouetted against the flickering light of torches. I concealed myself behind a cluster of bushes, my eyes straining to make out what was happening. Masked figures emerged from the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. They formed a circle around a makeshift altar, their voices rising in a haunting chant. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that sent shivers down my spine. A woman dressed as La Llorona stepped into the center of the circle, her white gown flowing around her like a shroud. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow pits of despair. She raised her arms, her voice rising in a mournful wail that echoed through the night. The chanting intensified, the rhythm quickening, the words becoming a jumbled mess of syllables. I could feel the ground trembling beneath my feet, the air growing heavy with an oppressive dread. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, his form cloaked in darkness. It was El Brujo. He stood tall and imposing, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the clearing. His voice, a mesmerizing whisper, cut through the chanting, silencing the crowd.
"Children of the night,"
he said, his words dripping with a seductive power.
"we gather here to honor the spirit of La Llorona, to seek her blessing and her protection. We offer her our fears, our sorrows, our deepest desires."
The masked figures bowed their heads, their bodies swaying in unison. El Brujo raised his arms, his voice rising in a crescendo.
"La Llorona, hear our plea. Accept our sacrifice. Grant us your power."
A collective gasp filled the air as a gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the torches. The darkness was complete, save for the faint glow of the moon reflecting off the river. I could hear the sound of rushing water, the mournful cries of the woman dressed as La Llorona, and the frantic whispers of the cult members. I strained my eyes, trying to pierce the darkness. I saw a figure moving towards the altar, its movements swift and graceful. It was El Brujo. He knelt before the altar, his hands outstretched, his voice filled with a desperate fervor.
"La Llorona,"
he whispered,
"I offer you my devotion, my loyalty, my very soul. Grant me your power, your immortality. Make me a god among men."
The air crackled with energy, the ground trembling beneath my feet. I could feel the power of El Brujo's magic surging through the clearing, a palpable force that threatened to consume everything in its path. I knew I had to act. I had to stop El Brujo before his dark ritual was complete. But I was just one man, alone and outnumbered. I had no weapons, no backup. All I had was my courage, my determination, and the faint hope that I could somehow break the spell that held the city captive. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I slipped away from the riverbank ritual, the eerie chanting and La Llorona's wails echoing in my ears. I needed to find proof, something tangible to expose El Brujo's sinister operation. Returning to Esperanza Nueva, I decided to explore the building's underbelly. My instincts, honed over years on the force, told me there was more to this place than met the eye. I found a loose panel in the basement storage room, revealing a hidden staircase leading down into the darkness. The air grew thick and musty as I descended, the only light coming from my flickering flashlight. The stairs ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door, its surface etched with strange symbols that sent a shiver down my spine. I pushed the door open, revealing a hidden chamber. The room was dimly lit by flickering candles, their flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The walls were covered in occult symbols, intricate diagrams, and cryptic phrases written in a language I didn't recognize. A large altar dominated the center of the room, adorned with human bones, animal skulls, and other macabre offerings. A sense of dread washed over me, a primal fear that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I had stumbled upon the heart of El Brujo's dark magic. I moved deeper into the chamber, my flashlight beam illuminating a table piled high with books and journals. I opened one of the journals, my eyes scanning the faded pages. It was filled with El Brujo's twisted philosophy, a rambling manifesto detailing his belief in the power of fear and despair. He believed that by harnessing the negative energy of his victims, he could achieve immortality and ascend to a higher plane of existence. The missing migrants, I realized with horror, were not just victims of exploitation. They were sacrifices, their lives offered up to fuel El Brujo's dark magic. The journal detailed the rituals, the incantations, the gruesome sacrifices. It was a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity, a glimpse into the mind of a madman consumed by power and ambition. I closed the journal, my stomach churning. I had seen enough. I had the proof I needed to expose El Brujo and bring his reign of terror to an end. But I also knew that I was in grave danger. El Brujo would not hesitate to silence anyone who threatened his power. I quickly gathered as much evidence as I could, stuffing the journals and ritualistic artifacts into my backpack. I then made my way back up the hidden staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. As I emerged from the basement, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlight. It was El Brujo. He stood there, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. A sinister smile played on his lips, as if he had been expecting me.
Detective Martinez,
he said, his voice a chilling whisper.
I've been expecting you.
The volunteer coordinator's face, once kind and welcoming, contorted into a mask of shock and betrayal. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto mine, a silent scream escaping her lips. I knew in that instant that my cover was blown, my charade exposed.
He's a police officer,
she shrieked, her voice echoing through the chamber. The other volunteers turned towards me, their faces contorted in anger and suspicion. Two burly men grabbed my arms, their grip like iron as they dragged me towards a makeshift cell. I struggled, kicking and yelling, but my efforts were futile. The cell door slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. I could hear the sound of El Brujo's laughter echoing through the corridors, a chilling reminder of the danger I was in. I slumped against the wall, my mind racing. I had been so close to uncovering the truth, to exposing El Brujo's evil. Now I was trapped, at the mercy of a madman. Hours passed, each one a torment of uncertainty and fear. The only sound was the dripping of water from a leaky pipe, a rhythmic torture that gnawed at my nerves. Then the cell door creaked open, revealing two figures silhouetted against the dim light. I was dragged back into the chamber, my heart pounding in my chest. El Brujo sat on his throne, a twisted smile playing on his lips. He held a small vial in his hand, its contents swirling with a sickly green hue.
This will open your mind, detective,
he said, his voice dripping with malice.
It will show you the true face of La Llorona.
He forced the vial between my lips, the bitter liquid burning my throat. The world around me began to spin, the walls melting and reforming into grotesque shapes. I saw flashes of images, horrifying visions of La Llorona's vengeful spirit. I screamed, trying to fight off the hallucinations, but they only grew stronger. I saw La Llorona's skeletal hand reaching for me, her hollow eyes burning into my soul. I felt her icy breath on my neck, her mournful wails echoing in my ears. I thrashed against my bonds, my body racked with convulsions. I felt myself slipping away, losing my grip on reality. I was lost in a nightmare, a vortex of terror and despair. Time lost all meaning. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind a battleground of conflicting images and sensations. I saw faces of the missing children, their eyes pleading for help. I heard the whispers of the dead, their voices urging me to fight. But the darkness was closing in, threatening to swallow me whole. I felt my strength waning, my will to fight fading. I was on the brink of surrender, ready to embrace the oblivion that awaited me. Then a voice cut through the darkness, a familiar voice filled with warmth and compassion.
Mike,
It said.
fight back. Don't let him win.
It was Maria's voice, a beacon of hope in the sea of despair. Her words ignited a spark within me, a flicker of defiance that refused to be extinguished. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of strength I had left. I would not let El Brujo win. I would not succumb to his dark magic. I would fight back for myself, for Maria, for all the innocent souls he had tormented. I opened my eyes, a newfound determination burning within me. The hallucinations were gone, replaced by a clarity of purpose. I was ready to face El Brujo, to expose his evil and bring his reign of terror to an end. A sliver of defiance remained within me, a tiny ember refusing to be extinguished by El Brujo's dark sorcery. The room spun a kaleidoscope of grotesque visions, but through the swirling chaos, a name formed in my mind, a desperate plea born of both fear and defiance. "La Llorona!" I cried out, my voice echoing in the cavernous chamber. "Hear me! Help me!" A hush fell over the room, the chanting and incantations abruptly ceasing. El Brujo's eyes widened, a flicker of doubt clouding his smug expression. A sudden gust of wind, seemingly conjured from the depths of the earth, swept through the chamber, extinguishing the candles and plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted among the masked figures, their whispers turning into frantic cries. A woman screamed, her voice piercing the darkness like a shard of glass. And then a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was a wail, a mournful cry that seemed to rise from the very depths of the earth. It was the cry of a mother bereft of her children, a sound of pure agony and despair. It echoed through the compound, growing louder with each passing second, until it filled every corner and crevice. The air grew thick with a palpable fear, the kind that seeps into your bones and rattles your soul. The masked figures huddled together, their bodies trembling, their voices raised in a cacophony of prayers and pleas. El Brujo's composure cracked, his face contorted in a mask of terror.
"No!"
he screamed, his voice raspy and desperate.
"You can't take me yet. I'm not ready."
But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The wail grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be right beside me. I felt a cold breath on my neck, a spectral touch that sent shivers down my spine. The ropes binding my wrists loosened, as if unseen hands were working to set me free. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The chamber was still shrouded in darkness, but I could sense a presence, a powerful force that was not of this world. I stumbled towards the door, my hands outstretched, guided by an unseen hand. As I burst out of the chamber, the wailing reached its crescendo, a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the building. The ground trembled beneath my feet, the walls cracking and groaning as if the compound itself was about to collapse. I ran through the maze of corridors, the screams of the cult members echoing behind me. I could hear the sound of collapsing walls, the shattering of glass, the roar of the river as it surged towards the compound. I burst out into the open air, gasping for breath. Behind me, the building crumbled into ruins, consumed by the darkness. The wailing subsided, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. I stood there, panting, my body trembling with adrenaline. I had escaped El Brujo's lair, but at what cost? Was La Llorona a vengeful spirit who had come to claim her due? Or was she a manifestation of the collective grief and despair that had plagued Juarez for so long? I didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. El Brujo's reign of terror was over. The truth had been revealed, and the people of Juarez were finally free from his grasp. Fueled by a primal rage and the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I fought back against my captors. A knee to the groin, a sharp elbow to the ribs. I lashed out with the fury of a cornered animal. Their grip loosened, their surprise giving me the opening I needed. I broke free, diving into the darkness as they scrambled to regain their footing. I found Maria huddled in a corner, her eyes wide with fear. "We have to get out of here," I hissed, grabbing her hand. Together we ran through the labyrinthine corridors, the sounds of chaos erupting behind us. The compound was in disarray, cult members panicked and disoriented by the collapse of their sanctuary. We rallied a group of brave locals and disgruntled volunteers, their faces hardened with determination. Armed with makeshift weapons, pipes, shovels, kitchen knives, we stormed the main hall, a ragtag army fueled by righteous anger. The battle was fierce, a chaotic melee of punches, kicks, and curses. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. We fought our way through the panicked crowd, pushing towards the epicenter of the chaos. I caught glimpses of familiar faces, the volunteers I had worked alongside, their eyes filled with a newfound resolve. They had seen the truth, the dark heart of Esperanza Nueva, and they were ready to fight back. We reached the inner sanctum, the room where El Brujo had held his twisted rituals. He stood in the center, his robes tattered, his mask of power slipping. His eyes, once filled with a mesmerizing charm, were now wide with terror.
"You cannot defeat me,"
he screamed, his voice cracking.
"I am a god."
But his words rang hollow. His magic had failed him, his power extinguished by the collective will of those he had oppressed. "You're nothing but a charlatan," I spat, my voice filled with disgust. "A con artist who preys on the weak and vulnerable." He lunged at me, his hands outstretched, his fingers clawing at my face. I dodged his attack, my fist connecting with his jaw. He stumbled back, his eyes filled with rage.
"You will pay for this,"
he shrieked, summoning the last vestiges of his power. But it was too late. The people of Juarez had risen up, their fear replaced by a burning desire for justice. They surged forward, their voices raised in a triumphant roar. El Brujo was overwhelmed, his body engulfed by the angry mob. I watched as he was dragged away, his screams fading into the distance. The nightmare was finally over. Back in Laredo, the weight of the badge felt different. It was a symbol of a past life, a chapter closed. The ghosts of unsolved cases no longer haunted me. I had faced the darkness, stared into the abyss, and emerged changed. Retirement wasn't the empty void I had once feared. It was a new beginning, a chance to channel my experience and knowledge into something meaningful. I thought of the migrants I had met, their dreams shattered, their lives uprooted. I thought of La Bestia, the infamous train that carried countless souls north, a perilous journey fraught with danger and uncertainty. I decided to make a difference, to offer a helping hand to those who needed it most. I volunteered at a local shelter, providing support and guidance to those who had just arrived in Laredo. I shared my stories, my knowledge of the borderlands, hoping to prepare them for the challenges that lay ahead. I even made a few trips south, riding La Bestia alongside the migrants, offering a comforting presence, a voice of experience in the face of fear. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to those who had lost everything. The nightmares of Juarez still haunted me, the echoes of La Llorona's wails lingering in the darkest corners of my mind. But I had found a new purpose, a way to redeem the failures of my past. I had become a protector, a guide, a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. I may have retired from the force, but I had not retired from the fight. The battle for justice was far from over, and I knew that as long as there were people in need, as long as there were shadows to be chased, I would never truly be done.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches, and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.